Colin Kaepernick is not, like, he's not Voldemort anymore. You know what I mean? Like, he's and it's so crazy because the NFL never says his name, yet we're now hearing like, oh well, Goodell is saying I would encourage teams to hire him.
Hey everybody, welcome back to In My Bag with Brian Alexander Jeffra. Today we are lucky enough to be joined by Kimberley Martin from ESPN's NFL coverage. Really excited to have you, Kimberley. And I want to start off by just asking, how have things been since making that transition? It happened right before kind of this outbreak, so just jump right into it. How have things been for you?
Yeah, my transition to ESPN has been interesting. My first week was actually the week that the NBA shut down. So I left Bristol, came home, and then the next day the NBA is on hiatus. So that changes everything. But it's been good. It's been interesting. I think we all have to figure out, how do you adjust? You know, everybody was talking about what's your new normal. You know, people are on conference calls, Zoom calls, while their kids are right next to them, or their dogs, or their spouses. So yeah, I've had to adjust in the same way. And I think the pandemic has afforded me the opportunity to write columns, to write features, to do video features, to sort of push the envelope on what I can do and show that I'm versatile. So that's been a good treat. And I expect to push the envelope a little bit more while I'm there. So.
Well, that's a perfect segue to my next question, which is, what can we expect to see from you when the NFL season comes back?
Whenever the NFL season comes back, I think fans will see me in a lot of different places. Like I said, you know, I've got work that's featured on the Undefeated or ESPN.com, working with the production team on videos at games, you know, reporting for, you know, I'll be live at games, provided media access hasn't changed that drastically. Yeah, so pregame, you know, countdown, I'll be on there giving you guys information on whatever game I'm covering. And I expect some NFL Live, you know, appearances here and there. So it'll be good.
That's really exciting. I'm excited to see you in some of those on-air opportunities. Tell me about some of the columns that you've written so far. I'd love to know more about them, you know, given where we are with this renewed push for racial equality. I'd love to just kind of get what you've been working on so that everybody out there can check it out.
It's funny because I was hired strictly for on air, and you know, my contract is like, yeah, you'll contribute on .com and stuff when able. But because of the pandemic, you know, studio time, it's everybody's just trying to figure out how to make pieces fit in a pandemic. So I'm writing features like Drew Brees situation, that was big. The mea culpa and the interlocking hands, and you know, his 36 hour, it wasn't even 36 hours, I think it was 48 hours of like I don't know, confusion and then enlightenment that we saw play out in real time. So I wrote a column on that, sort of, you know, this, you know, these are the difficult conversations that need to be had, and how it takes more than just saying, yes, I'm an ally and I can be a leader in the Black community. It's sort of, you can't say that if you don't understand baseline, that the kneeling during the playing of the national anthem is not, those players are not trying to disrespect the flag, and it's not about patriotism. So it was that whole Drew Brees thing kind of set off one column. And then I wrote about the NFL and how, as much as this seems like a new movement, new time, you know, the energy feels different. This is very similar to what we experienced in, I think 4 years ago with Colin Kaepernick, and how the league responded. You know, fans were upset, sponsors were upset, and you know, Colin Kaepernick was bad for business. So now, and you had Trump, you know, 4 years ago, Trump was a huge presence on the political, you know, stage, and he was commenting on the NFL and players in particular, which only made players react. So now it's the same thing. He's tweeting about the NFL and how he won't watch and all that stuff. So this is familiar territory for the NFL, but the NFL has a chance to do things differently and to show that, they also have been enlightened in some way.
Yeah, it seems that they have done that in some ways. Obviously, you need to see more actual action. To the point, it's not just about saying it; it's about actually doing it. So, I'd love to know how you felt about their reaction to the players coming forward and saying, "You need to admit you were wrong about Kaepernick. You need to do more of it."
You know, the interesting thing about the NFL, it's always reactionary, right? Like the initial press release that was released is sort of like, we hear you guys, like we're with you, we support Black people, but it didn't mention police, it wasn't mentioned race, it wasn't like the issues that the players are specifically talking about and consistently bringing up. There was no mention of those terms in the press release. So it kind of felt a little hollow. If being that this is a league that has made it so Colin Kaepernick could not get a job, like they don't mention Colin Kaepernick's name at all. Yet now the league is saying, okay, we agree, we hear you on social justice issues, yada yada yada. This is sort of the movement that Cap started 4 years ago. So, those players getting together, and I mean, they were huge stars. These weren't just like any old bumpkins. Like you had Patrick Mahomes and OBJ, and like DeAndre Hopkins, like some guys who hadn't been vocal in the past, saying you need to hear us. That's a game changer. So then for Goodell to release his video, it showed that he heard them, but again, it's reactionary. It's like there wouldn't have been a need for that video from the players had the NFL's initial statement really gotten to the heart of what those players are talking about. So, I understand why it was met with skepticism, but again, in all fairness, the commissioner coming out and saying Black Lives Matter, we messed up and we didn't listen to you. That is huge. You haven't seen that before.
One of the things that I've actually been thinking about and talking about, and you mentioned in terms of being reactionary, one way the NFL could be proactive is when Roger Goodell's contract comes up in 2023, they could replace him with Troy Vincent. I've actually spoke with Warren Moon about that, and I think it's actually a really interesting idea. I'd love to know if you've heard any buzz about that, if you think that would make a difference to the players, seeing an African-American at the head of the NFL, because there are no owners who are African-American. So it could be a game changer for them, and it would be proactive. Love to know, again, if you just have heard any buzz about that and just your feelings about that idea.
Yeah, no, I haven't heard any buzz yet about Troy. I understand why people think it would make sense. I don't want us to just all have this knee-jerk reaction like, okay, we're talking about Black Lives Matter, so let's just make the Black person in charge of everything. Like I don't, and I'm sure we'll get into this, but even coaches in the NFL, like they want a chance to show that, they know what they're doing and they want an opportunity, but no one wants to feel like, okay, well, you're just Black, so here, like, you guys, we get it, you guys matter, so just like take this job. I'm sure Troy is capable. I mean, the NFL commissioner works for the owners, so when Roger Goodell is out there saying anything, he works for 32 organizations, so this isn't, whoever is in that place, in that spot, has to do their bidding in a sense. So whether that's Troy or somebody else, I think obviously Troy would be, if he was interested, should be considered. But I also don't, I caution against just that knee jerk, like, well, this guy should, he should get it, right? Because he would understand what these players, I mean, at the end of the day, unions and organizations, like they have different, you know what I mean? Like they all want to come together, but as long as players have to believe that whoever's running the NFL has their best interests at heart. So I think Troy would be a good candidate if he wanted to do it. But Yeah, I think there's more to it than just the race aspect.
Totally, and obviously I wasn't suggesting it because of that, but it does bring up a good point. It's not just about giving a million opportunities to people of color. It's about hiring the right people and the people who are going to do the job the best and represent African Americans in the best way. So I agree with you there completely, and it does bring up the lack of GMs and head coaches in the NFL. I'd love to know your thoughts on that and what the NFL could and or should do to, give more African Americans opportunities as a coach, a GM.
You know, I felt kind of torn with the proposals that the NFL had come up with as far as like increasing minority hires and draft picks are involved. If I was torn because again, especially speaking as an African American person, it's like you can do the job. You're qualified, but you also like you're not just trying to get the job because you're Black. You want, at the end of the day, it's like the people making decisions, the owners. So like we're talking about Goodell, but it really it's these owners. They have to feel like the status quo is not going to be good enough. They have to feel like, okay, I'm not going to just copy what that other team is doing. Like I'm not going to just bring in that retread coach. The pipe, like where there's a pipeline. If we can identify Lincoln Riley as like an up and coming guy, like we could be looking at other people in college. You know what I mean? Like Loxley was at Alabama, like Gaddis is at Michigan. Like there are different guys that are out there. I just think sometimes the NFL owners are business people. So they necessarily may not know football. A lot of them don't know football. So you want to trust that the people around them know football. But as a former psychology major, I know that people tend to gravitate to people who look like them, who are similar to them, same backgrounds, that they feel comfortable with. When you're having a conversation, you want to feel like, okay, I could see myself every day interact. That's the problem with some of these interviews. It's sort of like owners sometimes are a little like apprehensive. They're sort of like, okay, I'm not really like jiving with this guy. And so I think it has a ripple effect on hiring. I think we just assume, that going with this retread would be a better choice than giving this guy over here a chance, because that's counter to what the NFL does. You just need owners to be more open-minded and to catch themselves. And this is a conversation. It's not just NFL owners. It's just in life. We all have to be cognizant of whatever biases we have, whatever. If you're a businessman and you're thinking like, well, I don't know if this guy is a sure thing. Sometimes you got to take a chance on somebody.
That's a great point. And it's interesting because you mentioned the business element of it, and it seemed like that played a big role in Kaepernick initially kind of getting blackballed from the NFL. And now all of a sudden it's good for business. It's good for PR.
I know.
Have Colin Kaepernick. And I felt like what Anthony Lynn said about him, that he'd be crazy not to give him a roster opportunity, was interesting, because why wouldn't it have been crazy 3 years ago or 2 years ago or whenever it was? So I'd love to just ask you, do you think teams are actually interested in signing Colin Kaepernick, or do you think it's about the fact that now it's a positive to be associated with Colin Kaepernick?
I think there were a lot of coaches. I don't want to say a lot. There were coaches that were interested this whole time in bringing him in, and they were met with resistance. Again, that's an ownership, whether GM. It's sort of like, then we get into the business aspect of like, is it worth having this guy, having that circus, all that comes with him. That was the discussion over the last 4 years. Like, it's not really worth it. And a lot of coaches felt like, yeah, I want to bring him in, of course. Now, it's hard not to feel skeptical about, it's like, Aunt Jemima's being like taken off boxes, and like all of a sudden people are like, oh yeah, we're now getting rid of our like racial stereotypical like slave imagery because it's not good. It's like these are things that we already we already knew, and now in this moment people are sort of like, okay, yes, this is the right thing to do. And I think it kind of extends to the NFL in the same way. Like, okay, now the tide is turned. Everybody is saying like everybody's trying to hold individuals and corporations accountable, um, from a diversity standpoint, from do you really care about Black lives and all that stuff. And so now Colin Kaepernick is not like, he's not Voldemort anymore. You know what I mean? Like he's and it's so crazy because the NFL never says his name, yet we're now hearing like, oh well, Goodell is saying I would encourage teams to hire him. If he's ready, if he wants to play, I would encourage them to work him out or whatever. It's a very strange 180 that's like 4 years too late in a way. So yeah, I don't know. It's hard not to be skeptical, but being that I know that there were coaches then who wanted to bring him in, maybe one of them actually gets their owner now to acquiesce and say, yeah, you were right, we should try him out.
Yeah, that's fair enough, and I agree with you. Or should I say, it's good to hear that the coaches were really looking at it from a football standpoint. But I agree with you. It feels a little fishy to me that all of a sudden now he's being brought up, especially when a guy like Cam Newton. I mean, I know the shoulder injury, you can't check him out because of the restrictions and everything like that. But especially when a guy like Cam Newton is still a free agent, and now all of a sudden teams are like, let's bring in Colin Kaepernick. And, it's been 4 years since he played. And the last time he played, it wasn't that he was horrible, but he certainly, seemed to have regressed. So I just thought that was really interesting. But speaking of Cam, is there any buzz around him? There are people who are now saying, oh, the Browns should sign him, this team should sign him, that team should sign him. But is there any actual buzz, or are we still just in a holding pattern with him because teams still can't bring him in for the physical and kind of have those conversations?
Yeah, I think we're in a holding pattern. I mean, I think his name is being discussed, but I think it's a lot of the discussion comes from us. Like, like we are thinking, what would make a great team? Like this, he should be there. Like why, like why did the Chargers like get it? Like all these things, like all these conversations. Um, the shame of it is with Cam, it's the medical and the timing of everything is just from his timing of his release to the fact that COVID is here, to the fact that these teams can't work him out, look at him with their own doctors.
I wrote a column the other day just saying that if Colin Kaepernick is signed before Cam Newton with all the question marks, I said that would be, come on, that would be too much. And it's nothing against Kaepernick, but like if you're saying Cam has question marks, I can't even, as a player, not as a person or anything like that, but like you haven't seen Kaepernick play in 4 years other than that.
And that's the shame of it. That's the shame of what the whole NFL situation, and making it a place where he wasn't allowed, essentially, because now it's 4 years later. I mean, I know Mike Vick like came back after several years, and you can make the argument like Colin, he's been working out, he's fine. A lot of these backups aren't any good in the NFL. He could easily replace one of them. But it just speaks to, it's just such a shame. Like so much time was wasted, and for what? That does make me sad.
No, and that's totally fair. I'd love to get to another question going more towards the COVID-19 pandemic that we've been going through. I'd love to know what you're hearing from players about Zeke, his positive test being released. Obviously, he tweeted about it and was justifiably upset. But, as we look forward to the NFL season, the reality is that in all likelihood, other players are going to get it, and they're probably not going to be happy that, this information is being leaked. I'd love to know if you've heard anything from the players about how they feel about Zeke's test being leaked.
Yeah, I mean, guys in the NFL, like they don't like talking about injuries. A lot of guys are fearful of like, oh, coach doesn't want us talking about just plain injuries in a season, right?
Yeah.
When you talk about, positive COVID diagnosis, I mean, that's something different. I think guys at this point, a lot of them are they just don't know. Like you're heading into a season you want to play, but there's also that threat of COVID out there, and what's going to happen. I don't think the NFL, I really don't think in this type of sport, in this type of environment, in locker rooms, I don't know how the NFL can wrap its arms around the whole situation and ensure that you can't ensure that everybody is going to be fine. You know what I mean? Like, there will be players that test positive, and, you know, that information is it's going to come out. It's going to come out because it's going to come out, like a team person will leak it. Or, you know, an agent, in the case of Zeke, like his agent confirmed it, you know, and he's talking about HIPAA laws. People are like, well, bro, like your agent, like, confirmed the information, you know, do HIPAA laws extend to you know, player agent, you know, stuff like that. So, I mean, it is interesting. It is interesting. I think there's so much uncertainty. So I think guys just want to play, but they just want to stay safe. So it's a lot. It's a lot. It'll be really interesting to see how the NFL handles this.
It's also really going to be hard because even Mercedes-Benz Stadium workers, 11% of them tested positive for COVID. I have no idea how, once the season starts, and you even mentioned players being more, you know, reserved about saying when they're injured because they don't want to lose their job, right? It's not just about the Ezekiel Elliott's of the world who are going to get paid no matter what, right? It's about that person who's the 48th or 49th person on the roster who's fighting for that job. It's going to be really interesting to see how they actually handle that. And to your point, nobody knows yet because it's too speculative to look ahead,
right,
to August and September. One other thing I wanted to talk with you about, you know, because I know you covered the Redskins. That's also been brought up now as a topic of conversation, is that name. And even in my group chat, they've said you shouldn't even say the name to me, and you know, forgive me if you're offended that I did, but that name has been brought up again of should that be changed. I'd love to know your thoughts on whether or not you think it should be changed, and also if there is this growing buzz. Even Kenny Stills today tweeted, you know, at the Redskins saying to change that name. So I'd love to just get your thoughts on that.
It is interesting. Like, when I was on the beat, you know, that conversation has been around the Redskins forever. Fans, you know, picket signs, even training camp. There's even one guy like holding a sign saying change the name. And I was told Dan Snyder will never change the name. You know, like that was what was what I heard repeatedly on the beat. And if there ever was a time to change it, I mean, I personally think it should be changed. I understand when people talk about the history and like the love that people have for the franchise, and like it's not, you know, they love it. It's not a symbol, you know what I mean? It's not a symbol of like racism or bigotry to them. But I think, you know, at this point, it's sort of, we all have to think like it's not only about how we feel. You know what I mean? We have to be cognizant of how our words, like how our actions do impact others. And this debate about the name has been raging like for so long. And the organization, Snyder's been so, he's been so adamant about keeping it. So I don't think it'll change. I really don't. I don't think he'll change the name. And I think it's disappointing because I think as we're looking to individuals and trying to hold each other and ourselves accountable and corporations accountable and organizations, it's very hard to completely ignore the fact that like one of the teams has a name that fans really have a visceral reaction to. I don't know how that sits with you and you don't pay attention to it.
I agree. And actually, I think it's an interesting point is that now that you have people like Patrick Mahomes, you know, you mentioned some of those stars who were part of that video, starting to come out against it. I wonder if there could be more of a player, you know, not a boycott, because obviously people are going to want to get paid and, It is an
Right.
NFL franchise. It's one of very few. But I wonder if there could be a more concerted effort from them to do something about it.
Yeah, I think, again, if there ever was a time for players to, I think players now kind of realize that they have agency, their voices do matter in the league. It's almost like this watershed moment of like, you can't close the door, like we're past that point where players are just gonna kind of go along with things. And so if enough players, like I saw that Kenny Stills tweet earlier today, if enough guys want to speak out on something, they're, as athletes, their platform that affords them this megaphone where people listen. And I've seen guys already affect change. So that could totally happen.
Well, it's going to be an interesting, season if it starts on time or how it starts. I'm really looking forward to seeing you and obviously talking about all the social issues, but also talking about football. One of the absolute best minds in the game. Kimberley, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.